At 7:22 in the morning, my best friend stood at my front door in the November cold wearing my old Roots jacket over her pajamas, holding a Tim Hortons cup in each hand, and said, "I heard what you told your sister about me." She called to check if it was true. I had been awake for exactly 4 minutes. "My name is Theo. Wait, my name is Patrick. No, let me start properly. My name is Reed. I'm 31. I teach high school English at a public school in Ottawa, and I am the kind of person who triple checks his marking before handing it back and keeps his feelings in a very organized drawer that he never opens in front of people who matter, especially not in front of Scarlett Hume." Scarlett was 29. She worked as a junior architect at a firm in the Glebe, took the 85 bus to work even though she could afford Uber, and she had been my best friend since the September we both ended up at the same Tuesday trivia night at a bar on Elgin, and neither of us knew anyone else in the room. That was 4 years ago. Since then, she had become the person who knew my coffee order without asking, who called me when a project got approved, and also when one didn't, who once drove 40 minutes in a snowstorm to sit in my apartment and watch bad television when I told her my dad had gone back into the hospital. She was also the reason I had been on the phone with my younger sister, Kira, until midnight. The night before, a few of us had gone to a birthday party for our friend Theo at a pub in Centertown. Just a low-key Friday thing, a back corner booth, a pitcher of beer, some nachos. Scarlett had shown up already tired from a deadline week and said she wasn't drinking, then proceeded to have 3 pints, because Theo kept insisting it was his birthday and she kept saying, "One more doesn't count if it's technically a celebration." By 10 o'clock she was warm and loose-shouldered, and leaning into my side in the booth the way she did sometimes when she forgot to keep a professional distance from me. Her knee was touching mine under the table. She was laughing at something Theo said, and I was watching her laugh, which was its own problem. At some point she turned and found me watching and said, "What? Nothing," I said. She looked at me for one beat too long. "You always say that." After the party, I walked her to the Rideau transit station because her apartment was one stop away and it was late and cold and she was not entirely steady on her feet. She argued for about 30 seconds, then accepted my elbow and we walked without talking. At the top of the stairs, she turned to face me. "Raid, yeah, do you ever think about the fact that we've never had a bad week at the same time?" I blinked. "What? Like, one of us is always okay enough to check on the other one." She squinted slightly, processing her own thought. "I think that's on purpose. I think we take turns." The train was audible somewhere underground. I said, "You should get on your train, Scar." She smiled like I'd given her something, and then she went down the stairs. I walked home in the cold and called Kira, who was still awake because she was 3 time zones back in Vancouver and not remotely interested in sleeping. I told her about the evening. I told her about Scarlett's knee against mine under the table, the things she'd said about bad weeks, the way she'd looked at me on the stairs. "Reed," Kira said. "I know, you have to tell her." "She doesn't feel that way." "How do you know?" "Because she's never said anything." "Neither have you," Kira said. "For 4 years." I rubbed the back of my neck and looked at the ceiling and said something I will not fully repeat here. Something about how Scarlett was the first person I'd wanted to keep since my last relationship ended badly and I'd moved to Ottawa knowing nobody, and how I had decided somewhere around month 3 of knowing her that loving her quietly was better than risking the only good thing I'd built in this city. Kira was quiet for a moment, then she said, "That's sad, Reed. That's genuinely sad." I told her to go to sleep. She said she would. She did not. What she did instead, apparently, was text Scarlett. I found this out at 7:22 the next morning when my doorbell rang and I opened it to find Scarlett standing on my front step in the November dark, her coat unzipped over flannel pajama bottoms with small foxes on them, holding 2 Tim Hortons cups and looking at me with an expression I could not immediately classify. "Your sister texted me," she said. My entire nervous system went offline. She said, and I am quoting directly, Scarlett continued, "My brother is too principled to ruin a good thing, but I want you to know it's a good thing you'd be ruining too." She held out the second coffee. "I've been outside for 5 minutes because I didn't know if I should knock." I took the coffee because my hands needed something to do. "You want to come in?" I said. Not a question. My voice came out very flat. "Yes," she said. My apartment was not prepared for a conversation of this nature. There were essays on the kitchen table I'd been marking the night before, an empty bowl from late-night cereal, and one of Scarlett's own scarves draped over the back of my couch from 2 weeks ago, when she'd left it here and said she'd grab it next time. She sat at the kitchen table and moved a stack of essays to one side with the easy familiarity of someone who had sat at this table 100 times. I stayed standing near the counter. "How much of last night do you remember?" I said. She tilted her head. "All of it. I had 3 pints over 4 hours and then drank water for an hour on your insistence." She paused. "I wasn't drunk, Reed. I was just relaxed." Something in my chest adjusted uncomfortably. "Then what you said on the stairs, I meant it." She wrapped both hands around her cup. "I do think we take turns. I think we've been doing it for years. And I think that's not an accident." The radiator clicked on. Outside, someone's car started slowly in the cold. "Kyra shouldn't have texted you," I said. "No," she agreed. "But I'm glad she did." She looked at me steadily. "Are you going to tell me she was wrong?" I should have. There were 17 responsible things I could have said. Instead, I turned and looked very intently at the middle distance above the toaster, which is what I do when I am deciding whether to be honest or just functional. "Scarred Reed," her voice was even. "Patient. You do this thing where you use my name to buy time. I know. It only works on people who are waiting for you to talk. I know that too." She stood up, not toward me, just upright, resettling. She picked up the scarf from the back of my couch and held it in her hands without putting it on. "You said something to Kira about keeping a good thing, about not wanting to ruin it." She met my eyes. "I need to know if that's the truth or just the thing you tell yourself." "Both," I almost said. Instead, "Does it matter?" "It matters to me." The kitchen clock ticked. I heard a bus go past on the street. I rubbed a hand over my face and said, "If I had told you, say, a year ago, what would you have done?" She was quiet for a moment. "Honestly, please." "I would have been scared," she said. "And then I would have said yes." The words landed in my chest and settled there, doing damage I couldn't fully measure yet. "You were with someone a year ago," I said. "For 6 months. Then I wasn't." She looked at the scarf in her hands. "And then you started dating that woman from your school, Allison. That lasted 8 weeks. I know, you told me." She glanced up. I remember being very calm about that information on the phone, and then sitting in my car in a parking lot for 20 minutes afterward. I stared at her. She gave a small, unhappy laugh. "So, we're both idiots." I pushed off the counter because I needed to move, but my apartment has no useful paces. I walked to the window and stood there looking at the frost on the railing. "I didn't think you saw me that way." "I didn't think you saw me that way," she said. "You're so careful, Reed. You never. I always thought if you felt something, you would have said something." "You thought wrong." A pause. Apparently. I turned around. She was still standing by the couch, holding the scarf, looking at me with an expression that I recognized now as the same one she'd used on the subway stairs the night before. Not teasing, not waiting, just present and a little tired of waiting. "Scar," I said, differently this time. "That's 3 times you've used my name," she said, without following it with anything. "I'm working up to it." "Take your time," she said, and she smiled a little. "I've been patient for a year and a half. Another 30 seconds is fine." I sat down at the kitchen table. She stayed standing, which meant she was slightly above me and I had no idea what to do with my face. When I said I didn't want to ruin it, I said slowly, "I meant it. But I think I've been using it as cover." "Cover for what?" "For the fact that I've had feelings for you for a long time. And I'm afraid of what happens if I act on them and they don't." I stopped, started again. "You're not just someone I like, Scar. If I lost you, I wouldn't know what to do with myself in this city." Her expression changed, softened, then steadied. "You moved here knowing no one," she said quietly. "Yeah, and I was the first good thing." I didn't answer, because saying yes felt like too much, and saying no would have been a lie. She came and sat down across from me. Not next to me, across, like she wanted to be able to see my face properly. She set the scarf on the table between us. "I need to tell you something," she said, "and I need you to not make it weird. That is not a reassuring opening. That's fair." She took a breath. "I've been turning down projects that would take me to Toronto for more than 2 weeks for the past 8 months, because I didn't want to be away from here." She paused. "Away from here." I understood what she meant. She meant me. "Scar, there it is," she said softly. I reached across the table. I didn't take her hand. I just put mine near it, a small, inadequate gesture. She looked at it for a moment, then turned her hand over. My phone rang. We both looked at it on the counter. Kira, in capital letters. Scarlett let out a long breath through her nose. Your sister, she said. She always had bad timing. Actually, I think her timing last night was perfect. I let it ring. Kira would leave a voicemail, she always did. 30 seconds later, she did. Then she texted, well? Scarlett read it over my shoulder and made a sound that was not quite a laugh. She's terrible. She means well. I know. She texted me a very long message at midnight about how you talk about me. She paused. I read it 4 times. I put the phone face down on the table. What did she say? Mostly, she said you're very good at looking like you're fine. Scarlett looked at me. She said the only time you don't look fine is when you're talking about me and you think no one's paying attention. I had nothing to say to that. It was probably true. Scarlett pulled her hand back and wrapped it around her coffee cup. The sun was fully up now, coming through the kitchen window at a low November angle. It hit the scarf on the table and made it look orange when it was actually burgundy. I had watched her pick it out in a store on Bank Street 4 months ago. It had taken her 11 minutes to decide, and she had texted me a photo from the change room asking if it was too much. I had said no. I had thought she looked beautiful. I had sent back a thumbs up. I've been doing that, I said. Doing what? Looking fine. With you, for years. She was quiet. At Theo's convocation last spring, I said, you wore that green dress and you were late because the bus didn't come, and you showed up apologizing, and you had snow in your hair. I looked at the table. I almost told you then. She had gone very still. That was 8 months ago. I know. Raid. Her voice was careful. Why didn't you? Because you were dating someone. She blinked. Then a short silence. I wasn't dating anyone in the spring. The architect. Jerome and I went to 2 dinners and agreed we were better as colleagues. You didn't tell me that. You didn't ask. She sat back slightly. You asked how the dinners were and I said fine, and you said good, and then we talked about something else. She looked at me steadily. I thought you didn't want the details. The morning light shifted. A notification was on her phone, which she ignored completely. I didn't want the details, I said, because I was afraid of what they'd be. A long silence. She pushed the scarf across the table toward me. An odd gesture. I looked at it. Last winter, she said, I left that here by accident, and then on purpose, and then I stopped pretending it was an accident. I looked at the scarf and then at her and understood that we had been having a completely different conversation underneath our actual conversation for a very long time. You could have said something, I said. You could have too. But her voice wasn't accusing, just honest. We're the same, Reed. That's part of the problem. The radiator clicked. Outside, a streetcar went past. For a long moment, neither of us moved. Then Kira's voicemail notification appeared on my screen. Hey, so I know you're probably in the middle of something and I'm sorry for texting her, but I'm not actually sorry. Call me later. Love you. Bye. Scarlett heard the automated preview and pressed her lips together. I like your sister. She's chaotic. She got me out of bed before 8 on a Saturday. I leaned back in my chair and looked at the ceiling and felt something large and difficult shifting in my chest. 4 years. 4 years of Tuesday trivia and bad weather transit and knowing exactly how she took her coffee and sitting next to her at things and going home alone and telling myself I had made a reasonable choice. I'm sorry, I said. She looked at me carefully. For what? For deciding what you would have wanted, without asking. A pause. You're forgiven, she said. If you stop doing it, I'll try. She stood up, and for a moment I thought she was leaving. Instead, she walked to the window and stood where I had been standing, looking out at the November street. From the back, I could see she still had the imprint of a pillow crease on her shoulder where her pajama top had gapped. You know what I keep thinking about? She said to the window. What? That thing I said on the stairs last night, about how we take turns being okay. She turned around. I didn't come up with that on the spot. I've been thinking it for months. Why didn't you say it before? Because it felt like too much to say sober. A pause. And then I said it anyway. Something in the room shifted. Not dramatically, just the temperature of it or the light. Scar, I said. If you use my name one more time without a sentence attached, she said, I'm leaving. Will you stay for breakfast? A beat. She looked at me. That's your move? Breakfast? I have eggs. I have that sourdough you like from the market. I have approximately 45 unresolved things to say to you, and they'll come out better if we're both fed. A slow smile. The real one, not the polite one. The one that made strangers turn around. 45 conservatively. She sat back down. Fine. But I'm making the eggs. Last time you made eggs, you went through 3 pans. That was 1 pan. That I washed twice. Raid. The bottom was sticky. She was already up and opening my fridge with the ease of someone who had been in my kitchen 100 times, which she had. She knew where the spatula was. She knew the back left burner ran hot. She pulled out the carton of eggs and set them on the counter and glanced over her shoulder. For what it's worth, she said. The thing Kira said. About you talking about me when you don't know people are paying attention. She turned back to the stove. I do that too. I sat very still at the kitchen table. Theo knows, she said, cracking an egg. He told me in September. He said, Scar, the man looks at you like he's already decided something. You should find out what. Theo said that? Theo has always been more perceptive than his trivia scores suggest. Another egg. I told him he was projecting. Were you lying? She didn't answer for a moment, just focused on the pan. Then quietly, yeah, I was lying. We ate at the kitchen table with the essays pushed to one side. We talked around it for a while. About the birthday party. About Theo's impression of a man who had once tried to explain NFTs to him at a conference. About the fact that November in Ottawa is genuinely trying to end everyone. The conversation we needed to have sat between us like the scarf on the table, patient and burgundy and not going anywhere. Halfway through breakfast, she said, Okay what? Okay, 45 things. Go. I set down my fork. Right now? You brought it up. She picked up her coffee and looked at me over the rim with the attentiveness she usually reserved for blueprints. I'll go first if it helps. It might. She put the cup down. When Allison from your school added you on Instagram, she said, I looked at her profile for a long time. Decided she seemed great. Texted you that night and asked if you wanted to see a movie the following Friday, which was the same night you told me you were going to dinner with her for the first time. She looked at the table. I said, oh, cool, have fun. And I went to see the movie alone. I had not known this. The knowledge of it sat in my ribs. Which movie? I said, because my brain needed a second. The one with the lighthouse. It was very bleak, and I cried on the bus home, but it was a good cry. She looked up. Your turn. I thought about the right thing to say. Then I stopped thinking about the right thing to say. When your biggest project got approved in March, I said, and you called me and you were crying and laughing at the same time. I was in the school parking lot and I sat in my car for half an hour after we hung up, just to stay in the feeling a little longer. A silence. That's not sad, she said. No, that's... She stopped. That's a lot, Reed. I know. I've been carrying it around. She reached across the table. This time she took my hand properly, fingers laced. Her grip was firm in the way of someone who had made a decision. I'm not going anywhere, she said. I know. I mean it. Whatever this is, I'm not. She pressed her lips together. I'm not going to lose you over it. But I'm also not pretending anymore. I looked at our hands on the kitchen table, on top of the pile of essays about narrative structure and unreliable narrators, which felt like the universe having a sense of humor at my expense. Okay, I said. Okay? I'm not pretending either, she exhaled. It was a very long exhale for someone whose shoulders were usually so squared. Then she looked at the essays under our hands and laughed once. You've been grading papers about the Great Gatsby, she said. How did you know? I can see the top sheet. She squinted. Your comment says, what is Fitzgerald actually saying here? Read. That's not a comment. That's a question. It's a generative prompt. It's a deflection in red pen. I laughed, and the sound of it loosened something I hadn't known was clenched. Her phone lit up on the table. She looked at it. Theo. She held it up so I could see. Theo. Mia said, you went to Reed's. Is this the moment? Tell me this is the moment. Theo. I've been waiting 4 years. Theo. Scar, I have a gift ready. She turned the phone face down. She said, you have great friends. They're insufferable. They care about you. She was quiet for a moment. Then, I want to tell you something, and I don't want you to make it into a bigger deal than it is. Okay. I have your number in my phone as my emergency contact. I changed it about 6 months ago. She looked at the window. I kept meaning to tell you. I just didn't know how to say it without explaining why. I understood why. 6 months ago was around the time Jerome happened. Around the time I watched her navigate a thing I wasn't part of and spent 2 months being very supportive from a very careful distance. Why? I said, even though I thought I knew. Because if something ever happened to me, she said evenly, you're the person I'd want to know first. The kitchen was very quiet. Scar, I started. 44 things left, she said. Right. I took a breath. I had your name in my phone under Scarlet. Don't be weird for about 6 months. Around the same time. She blinked. What? Because I kept texting you things and then deleting them, and the reminder helped. A laugh broke out of her, unexpected and bright. That is the most you thing I have ever heard. I'm working on it. You should delete the note. Already did. A while ago. I met her eyes. Around the time I stopped pretending the texts I kept were just friendly. The laugh faded into something quieter. She looked at me across the table and I looked at her, and the morning moved around us. A delivery truck outside, the neighbors upstairs starting their day, November doing its gray and golden thing through the window. I should go home at some point, she said. You don't have to. I'm in pajamas. You've been in pajamas here before. That was when I had a fever and you made me soup. The offer stands. She stood slowly and picked up the scarf from the table. I stood too. I wasn't sure why. Instinct, or maybe just not wanting to be sitting while she was leaving. We were both standing by the kitchen door, which led to the hall, which led to the front door, which led to the November morning. The walk to the transit station was 7 minutes. I knew because I had timed it once. She had the scarf bundled in her arms. She looked at it, then she looked at me. I'm not taking this home, she said. You left it here. I'm leaving it here again. She set it back on the couch, precise and deliberate. On purpose, with no pretending. My chest tightened in the way it did when something was too good to answer out loud. Okay, I said. She crossed the short distance between us and went up on her toes and pressed her mouth against mine. It was brief. 1 breath, maybe 2, soft in the way of something that had been waiting a long time to be gentle. When she stepped back, her cheeks were pink. That was not a mistake, she said, before I could say anything. I know. And I'm not taking it back. I know. Good. She looked at me steadily. I'm going home. I'm going to shower and eat something that isn't eggs and probably sit with this for an hour. She picked up her Tim Hortons cup. And tonight, if you want to, you could come over. We could get pho from the place on Rideau and sit on my floor and keep talking. 44 things, I said. She smiled. At least. She left. I stood in my apartment in the November morning and listened to the sound of my own breathing and the radiator in the city's going slowly about its Saturday. My phone buzzed. Kira, the fact that you haven't called means something happened. I'm choosing to believe it's good. I typed back. Go to sleep, Kira. Kira, it's 9 in the morning. Kira, also you're welcome. I locked the phone and looked at the scarf on my couch, burgundy and patient, and exactly where she'd left it. That evening, I brought pho and we sat on her floor, which was covered in blueprints she'd shoved aside with her feet, and we talked until midnight. The 44 things became 50, then 60. Then we stopped counting because it stopped feeling like a list and started feeling like a conversation between two people who had been waiting a long time to say things out loud. She laughed at one of my stories about a student's essay and knocked her knee against mine and left it there. I did not move mine. We did not figure everything out that night. There were awkward moments, an overlap where we both tried to apologize for the same general stretch of time, a pause when she mentioned Jerome and I needed a moment to be a reasonable person about it, a beat near the end of the night where I went quiet and she said, "Where did you go?" And I said, "Nowhere. I'm right here." And I meant it more than I'd meant anything in a long time. When I left, she walked me to the door. The hallway smelled like pho and wood floors and the cedar candle she kept on the entry table. I pulled on my coat. She leaned against the doorframe watching me with the attentiveness she usually reserved for plans. Next Saturday, she said, there's that new place on Preston that Theo keeps talking about. The Raymond place? Apparently it's very good and the wait is very long. She tilted her head. We could go early. We could, I said. Is that a yes, or are you checking your internal calendar? It's a yes, Scar. She smiled, the real one. I kissed her once in the doorway, which startled both of us slightly and then didn't. And then I walked down the stairs into the cold Ottawa night, feeling like a man who had just set down something heavy he'd been carrying so long he'd forgotten it had weight. Kira called at 11:30. I answered. The next morning, Scarlett texted me a photo. It was her scarf, draped over the back of my couch. She had taken it on her way out, gone to her apartment, and then come back, apparently, while I was on the phone with Kira, and slipped it through my mail slot. I have it still. Still on the back of that couch. She stopped pretending she'd ever take it home. I stopped pretending I'd ever give it back. Have you ever been so careful with someone you almost talked yourself out of the best thing you had? Tell me your story in the comments. If this one found you at the right moment, leave a like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.